Next speaker is John Pascal, who spent 18 years in the corporate world before Barb, I think, no, that's good. John spent 18 years in the corporate world before turning to teaching. And he's now in his 24th year of teaching 9th and 11th grade English honors at the oldest Catholic boys' school in New Jersey, Seton Hall Prep School. Students in his year-long honors course on Mark Twain earn English credits from Seton Hall University. John is a regular presenter at Mark Twain conferences in Hannibal and Elmira, has won 2 Quarry Farm fellowships for his scholarship, lectured at the Mark Twain House in Hartford, and published his research in the Mark Twain Journal, Critical Insights, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, and Mark Twain and Youth. His paper today is celebrating educational joy from historical sorrow. And I turn the floor now over to John.
Thank you, Judith. Let me pull up my screen. Can everyone see it? Full screen, we're good?
You're good, John. You're good.
Okay. It is an honor and privilege to represent Seton Hall Preparatory School and the Mark Twain Circle of America to the 2024 MLA Convention. Coincidentally, Sam Clemens wanted to be a pirate when he was a child. So in our eyes, he is an honorary prep pirate. The convention's theme is celebration, joy, and sorrow. In today's increasingly polarized America, in which educational standards and goals are being debated with apparently more closed-minded, emotional, and less open-minded logical reasoning, it is a celebration of academic joy that Mark Twain's A True Story, repeated word for word as I heard it, of 1874, has been analyzed and enjoyed by juniors and seniors since 2015 in the Writings of Mark Twain honors course that I developed here at the Prep. It studies Twain's extraordinary life, world, and his selected diverse works to have students see the relevance today of his stories and truths of life in all its stages as crucial for their growing up in our complex and turbulent world. His thoughts serve to increase and enrich their reading comprehension and critical thinking skills through his communicative abilities to stimulate their senses, emotions, and imaginations. Using Dr. R. Kent Rasmussen's entry and analyses of A True Story in his 2-volume work, Critical Companion to Mark Twain, a literary reference to his life and work as a foundation, students are best prepared to study this true story. This presentation gives selected student reactions to slavery, Twain's writing ability, and to Mary Ann Cord herself. According to Dr. Rasmussen, this frame story is based on the life story told by Mary Ann Cord, a former slave who worked for Clemens's sister-in-law at her Quarry Farm home in Elmira, New York. In the left photo, she is the second lady on the left. Most of the story is narrated in an African-American dialect that Twain worked hard to make authentic. He changes her name to Aunt Rachel. After writing it in mid-1874, he made it his first submission to the Atlantic Monthly Literary Magazine, which published it that November. It was later collected in his Sketches New and Old, 1875, and was the title story in the volume titled A True Story and the Recent Carnival of Crime, 1877. In Dr. Rasmussen's synopsis, it's a summer evening, and the narrator, Mr. C. Clemens, sits on the farmhouse porch watching the colored servant Aunt Rachel, who sits at a respectfully lower level, being mercilessly teased. Impressed by her easy, hearty laughter, he naively, foolishly, and insensitively asks her how she has lived 60 years without seeing any trouble. Startled by this naive question, Rachel tells her story. I emphasize that almost the entire focus is now properly on Aunt Rachel herself. According to the curators at the Mark Twain Home and Museum in Hartford, there then follows her tragedy loss, and reunion that reveals the trouble of an enslaved person's life. What is the connection to today's students? Well, Matthew said this, with the Black Lives Matter movement being such a prominent force in our lives, it makes sense to look back and discover what Mark Twain would think about these issues through his works. My favorite aspect of a true story is the absence of Twain as the narrator, deliberately honoring her words and emotions by not changing anything about the retelling of events. He translated her heart in written form for the reader to enjoy and learn. Now a cook at Quarry Farm, she had 7 children and her husband taken from her when she was a slave before the Civil War. During the war, she was reunited with the youngest son, Henry, who had escaped to the North. She told Clemens her story in the summer of 1874. A brief overview is necessary for key point comprehensions by my students. At the bottom, Aunt Rachel, how is it that you've lived 60 years and never had any trouble? She stopped quaking. She paused, and there was a moment of silence. She turned her face over her shoulder toward me and said, without even a smile in her voice, Mr. C, is you in earnest? It surprised me a good deal, and it sobered my manner and my speech too. I said, why, I meant, why, you can't have had any trouble. I never heard you sigh and never seen your eye when there wasn't a laugh in it. She faced fairly around now and was full of earnestness. Has I had any trouble? Mr. C, I's going to tell you, then I leave it to you. I was born down amongst the slaves. I know all about slavery because I've been one of them my own self. Well, sir, my old man, that's my husband, he was loving and kind to me, just as kind as you is to your own wife. And we had children, 7 children, and we loved them children just the same as you loves your children. They was black, but the Lord can't make children so black, but what their mother loves in them and wouldn't give them up. No, not for anything that's in this whole world. In Dr. Rasmussen's words, Rachel's mother, who was from Maryland, often went into tantrums proclaiming, I wasn't born in the mash to be fooled by trash. I's one of the old blue hen's chickens, I is. This was shouted particularly when she felt the slaves weren't moving fast enough to tend to Rachel's youngest son, Henry, who had cut his wrists and forehead. Rachel herself speaks these words when she is angry. Then her mistress began selling all her slaves, and Aunt Rachel knows the reality to come. Aunt Rachel had gradually risen while she warmed to her subject, and now she towered above us, black against the stars. She and her family are also auctioned off in Richmond, and she saw her husband and 6 children being sold one by one. She grabs Henry and threatens to kill anyone who touched him, but he whispered for her not to worry, as he would escape to the north and return to buy her freedom. Since that day, 22 years ago, Easter, Rachel has not seen her husband or 6 of her children. Rachel's new owner took her to New Bern, North Carolina, and made her his family cook. Eventually, the war came, and he fled before the Union troops, who took the town and made his house their headquarters. While cooking for the Union officers, Rachel asked after her son Henry, in case they saw him in the north. Unbeknownst to her at the time, Henry had fled to the north and become a barber. Later, he hired himself out to Union offers and scoured the South looking for her. One night, a black regiment held a ball at the house. While Rachel was working, a spruce young man danced into the kitchen with his partner, and Rachel ordered him out, and he shot her a surprised look. When more men came in, she straightened up to proclaim that she wasn't born in the mash to be fooled by trash, causing the young man to stare. The next morning, the young man returned to the kitchen early. As Rachel removed biscuits in the oven, the man leaned over to look at her face. Recognizing Henry by scars he acquired as a child, Rachel realizes that at last she has her own again. Oh no, Mr. C, I ain't had no trouble and no joy. A separate book could be written on the importance of this work to Twain's career. Aunt Rachel's dialect and vernacular was fresh and new, especially for non-Southerners as well as for us. This work is relevant to my life because it is crucial to know the whole story, as the world today is full of confused people. Mr. C didn't know the whole story and was looking for a much different response than the one he got. Aunt Rachel flexed her muscles and stamped him out. My other student, John, said this: Twain's writing power has you sitting on that porch and listening to Aunt Rachel talk to you. You feel the power and strength of each and every word said. Jackson said, a true story is a breathtaking piece of writing that addresses the sadness of a slave's life even after being freed. Not only does it expose white America's racism, but also gives the perspective of a slave who has felt hardship instead of a white man who thinks he has felt hardship. Therefore, the story becomes much more inspiring and adds to Twain's legacy as he was able to humiliate white America and reveal the sad truth about the horror that slavery brought. I said, why, I thought that is, I meant, why, you can't have had any trouble. I never heard you sigh and never seen your eye when there wasn't a laugh in it. John said, the key to a short story is how Mark Twain uses himself to take the place of white people in general. By humiliating himself, he is writing with such power to wake the public up and alert society as a whole by giving the slaves the credit they deserve. Taylor said, his stuttering is a clear sign of unknowingness and perfectly displays how he let his own character be the fool of the joke. Newman said, this represents how white people in America at this time were completely oblivious to the fact that slaves were human too and had feelings just like they did. He completely disregards the fact that as a former slave, she was likely separated from her family, beaten and whipped, and there was absolutely nothing she could do about it. And Sean said the nobility of her cool temper allowed her to insult the speaker. Well, sir, my old man, that's my husband. He was loving and kind to me, just as kind as you is to your own wife. And Jackson said, this is a prime example of Twain pushing racial equality and showing the commonality between Black and white people during this time. Aunt Rachel shows she is capable of the same exact emotion and sentiment of any white person, and that even though she is regarded as a slave or servant, she is just as competent of being just as emotionally intelligent as any white man or woman. And Aiden said, it sickens me how Aunt Rachel even had to speak in a demeaning way, as if her husband's love was presumed to have been different than how white people, holding skin and bone like the rest of the people on the planet, love their spouses. This line absolutely shows Aunt Rachel promoting equality. And we had 7 children, and we loved them children just as the same as you love your children. And they was Black, but the Lord can't make them so Black that a mother wouldn't give them up and love them. No, not for anything that's in this whole world. Jackson said the essential part of this quote that I found to be truly devastating was when Aunt Rachel says they was Black, so they are not as deserving of love as a white child. But even though they are Black, she is still going to love and fight for them as any mother would. This is another example of Twain breaking down the barrier between Black and white. But at the same time, he is displaying how desensitized Aunt Rachel has been to the racism that holds dominion over her everyday life. And Sean said, Aunt Rachel challenges the commonly held thought by white people that African Americans can't love as well or the same way as white people do. She says that God cannot make a baby so Black that its own mother can't love it. She shows that their family ties and love, no matter how unnatural to white people, was the same. She effectively puts herself and the Blacks on the same level as whites. This is a truth you cannot imagine a Black person saying in the late 1800s. She is establishing that she should be seen as an equal to whites, even though the reader sees that with her disposition and experiences, she should be held to higher regard. She towered above us, Black against the stars. Will said she towered into the night sky while little Mr. C, the foolish racist, should be on the bottom step, not considering Black people as fully human. Her powerfully painful rhetoric asserts her dominance. Taylor said she isn't mad at him. She only wished for him to acknowledge and respect that she indeed had trouble in her life. And just because she appears happy did not mean that she had a perfect past. John said, usually slaves were talked down to, but for once, Aunt Rachel took her humanity into her own hands to switch power and have control. This not only shows her gritty nature, but also Twain's ability to give her the respect she deserves. Sean, she is described as black against the stars, but her color has nothing to do with her standing. She is towering over them in tragedy and dignity, and her story is so powerful that she seems to block out the stars in the sky with her words. And Newman said Aunt Rachel makes him look like even more of a fool when she, a slave, stands up high and towers over him, a white man, and talks down to him, passionately telling him her story. In essence, she becomes the enlightenment for white America regarding its blindness to the ills of slavery. And she doesn't want her son to be taken away. I'll kill the man that touches him. And he whispers and say, I was going to run away and I worked to buy your freedom. But they got him. The men did. Will said, the irony of a child working to free his mother and the reader's agony of this preposterous situation. And Newman said, it is so fitting that her final and youngest son for auction, the one who was able to convince her not to fight for him and possibly lose her life, was reunited with her many years later. I wasn't born in the mash to be fooled by trash. I was one of the old blue hen's chickens, I is. Will said she equates herself with a wise blue hen chicken, which is unfortunate because her level of dignity can't go above a farm animal. But she is not to be taken as an unintelligent fool. Jackson said Twain enhances immediacy by showing how numb Aunt Rachel truly has become to the racism that plagues her life, as she believes that she is comparable to that of a chicken. The thought of her being nothing but a servant has been ingrained into her mind, almost as if someone has taken a branding iron and burned the word slave into her brain. Aunt Rachel does not realize the courage, strength, and intelligence that she possesses, but has been so degraded by the white society surrounding her that she truly believes she and a chicken are equal. And Taylor said, this quote proves her self-respect and her strong dignity, as blue hen chickens are known to be ferocious. Yet she successfully sticks up for herself against the other blacks who were laughing and teasing at her. I was a stooping down by the stove, just so, same as if your foot was the stove. And I'd opened the stove door with my right hand, so, pushing it back, just as I pushes your foot. And I just got the pan of hot biscuits in my hand, was about to raise up, when I see a black face come around under mine, and the eyes are looking up into mine, just as eyes are looking up close under your face now. And I just stopped right there and never budged, just gazed and gazed so. And the pan began to tremble, and all of a sudden I knowed. The pan dropped on the floor, and I grabbed his left hand and shoved back his sleeve, just so, as I was doing to you. And Sean said the most shocking moments are when Aunt Rachel demonstrates her movements on the foot and arm of Mr. C. She needed to be sure that the boy was really her son and checked his wrist for a mark. But to get her point across, she breaks the racial barrier. She grabbed a white man and swiftly pushed his foot and shoved his suit sleeve up. This not only crosses predetermined black etiquette, but also is a shocking gesture for a servant, which yet again expressed Aunt Rachel's value and self-worth to see herself as another one of Mr. C's friends or family. I got my own again. Oh no, Mr. C, I ain't had no trouble and no joy. And John said this, as a society, many saw slaves as weak or inadequate, but this could not be further from the truth. Many slaves endured more pain and suffering than any everyday white person could ever imagine. Yet society has the audacity to call these people weak. Aunt Rachel and many other slaves were the definition of vigorous. They were tough, strong. In today's society, many people judge one another just from looks. We need to come together to focus on the human being behind a skin color. Underneath everything, we are all the same human being. And Taylor said, although her confidence and courage are emphasized heavily throughout the story, Aunt Rachel subtly asserts her humanity in the fact that she was purely a mother just trying to see her son again. Once she finally did, true happiness found its way into her soul again. What truly distinguishes Aunt Rachel from most other people is that her character was never lost, her confidence never broken, and her willpower never let up. As she told her story, it is easy for one to tell just how remarkable of a woman Aunt Rachel really is. Twain sacrificed himself as the fool to get her story across in this emotionally passionate way. Without his deliberate ignorance, perhaps Aunt Rachel would have told the story from a more laid-back perspective. But I consider all readers of this work of Twain's to be lucky enough to have this raw emotion produced so we can truly obtain the awareness of the real-life challenges of a former slave. But even more importantly, what a struggling mother had to face. Twain's reaction is not needed, as it would take away from the strong emotion and awareness that was produced in her speaking. He wanted to show that he was speechless after being completely humbled and harshly corrected. And Sean said, she captivated her audience and the nation with her story. She was looked down on, but is the noblest of all. We easily perceive that the peoples furthest from civilization are the ones where equality between a man and a woman are furthest apart. And we consider this one of the signs of savagery. But we are so stupid that we can't see that we thus plainly admit that no civilization can be perfect until exact equality between man and a woman is included. What is a real civilization? Any system which has in it any one of these things, to wit, human slavery, despotic government, inequality, numerous and brutal punishments for crimes, superstition almost universal, and dirt and poverty almost universal, is not a real civilization. And any system which has none of them is. One mustn't criticize other people on grounds where he can't stand perpendicular to himself. With us, no individual is born with a right to look down upon his neighbor and hold him in contempt. Good citizenship would teach accuracy of thinking and accuracy of statement. Twain's story contributes to a more comprehensive personal understanding of the uniquely sorrowful effects of slavery in our country's history and the joy of discovering the extraordinary strength of character in Mary Ann Cord to serve as a role model for all students of all backgrounds and to use their courage to speak out against historical injustices from the past. Thank you.
Thank you, John.